It was now day 5 of our tour, and after driving to Tarbet, we boarded a launch in very wet and misty conditions for a cruise on Loch Lomond. We were soon to leave the lowlands and enter into the mountain ranges of the Scottish Highlands, which extend north of a line from Loch Lomond east to Stonehaven. Loch Lomond is Britain's largest freshwater lake and was immortalised in a Jacobite soldier's ballad. Far from home and dying, the soldier laments that his friends will travel home on the high ground, but he will be there first through the low ground of death. Passing near this magnificent hotel complex, our tour guide explained that it had started out in the 1820s as a small drover's inn. Almost surrounded by lofty hills, Loch Lomond is famed for its association with Rob Roy MacGregor, the famous Scottish outlaw, who was known as Red Robert because of the colour of his hair.
We cruised slowly along this shoreline in search of the cave where Rob Roy MacGregor was reputed to have hidden, but although we looked hard, we were not able to find where it was. Some person had vandalised the rocks by painting the words cave. However, we were informed that this was not the exact spot where the cave was to be found. Robert the Bruce is also said to have hidden in these rock crevices back in 1306.
Unfortunately, the rain and mist that morning precluded us from viewing the loch scenery at its best. The loch contains a number of small islands, and we saw little sign of life on the banks of the loch as we cruised along. Our morning cruise ended close to this hydroelectric powerhouse, which from time to time adds a much needed boost to the national grid. We spent a good half hour on the loch, and as we disembarked from the Lomond Princess, we were greeted by this magnificent white swan swimming close to the pier. A solitary goose wandering around the waterfront farewelled our group as we were about to board the coach and head north through the mountain ranges.
For more than an hour, we wound our way through this rolling mountain landscape, absorbing the ever-changing scene through the coach window. These highlands are rich in the history of the MacGregor clan, and particularly that famous character, Rob Roy. We made a brief stop to capture some views of these rugged mountains at a place known as the Three Sisters. Scotland's Highlands are alive with colourful history, and it was near this spot at Glencoe that on a wintry morning in 1692, 400 Campbell clan soldiers who had been guests with the MacDonalds of Glencoe murdered 38 of their hosts, including women and children. This treachery was for a long time a source of enmity between the two clans.
On arriving at Ben Nevis, we found the weather to be cold, wet and windy. Nevertheless, decided to take the gondola lift up the side of the mountain. Ben Nevis, at 4,406 feet, is at Inverness Shire and is the highest mountain in Great Britain. From the comfort of the cafe at the top of the gondola lift, we could see the chairlift to the summit was in operation. However, we declined to take this option and headed back down to the coach.
That evening we arrived at the Craig Lynn Hotel in Granton-on-Spey. This was to be our accommodation for the next 2 nights. The weather was cold and wet, and it started to snow as we looked out from our hotel room after dinner. Across the road we could see many fine houses built of grey granite stone. The town was founded in 1776 by Sir James Grant of Grunt, and became the chief seat of that ancient family whose members lived on the adjoining estate of Frucci since the beginning of the 15th century. The entrance to the hotel was simple, but attractively landscaped with finely manicured lawns surrounding a small pool and fountain. It is situated in the midst of beautiful woodlands, and an attractive parkland extended into these woods on the opposite side of the road. Our room had a large bay window which afforded plenty of daylight into the room, and the room was pleasantly warm and very comfortable. It had been snowing all night, and the scene next morning took on a remarkably different appearance, as the whole area was coated with a white blanket and the snow was still falling.
Passing through Inverness that morning, we had a brief glimpse of Inverness Castle, with its fascinating history, and we passed by St Andrew's Cathedral. Inverness is the headquarters of the Highland Region Administration. The emphasis here is on commerce and industry, and the Caledonian Canal passes through the outskirts of the town. About half an hour later we arrived at Drumnadrochit on Loch Ness, and as it was raining we moved into the Monster Exhibition Centre for shelter. We were also looking for some souvenirs and general information on the loch and some of its famous mythology. While we were not able to see the real Loch Ness Monster, there was an abundance of fakes around to remind us of this famous legend, which has been kept alive since St Columba is said to have encountered some kind of monster here over 1400 years ago.
It was still raining quite heavily as we boarded the coach once more and headed out of town to Urquhart Castle. The ruins of Urquhart Castle are found on the shores of Loch Ness. The castle was once occupied by Edward I, and it passed through several hands until in 1509 James IV gave it to John Grant of Fruch, whose dependents remained in possession until the 1900s. The castle was blown up in 1692 for fear it would fall into the hands of the Jacobites. The Jacobites were originally the adherents of King James II and later of the descendants of Charles I of the exiled House of Stuart.
Moving on again, we spent some time travelling through the mountainous countryside, heading west to the Isle of Skye. On the way we paused at Eilean Castle in Loch Alsh, and guardian of the confluence of the three lochs. This castle was built in 1220 by Alexander II to deter penetration by the Vikings. It later passed to the Mackenzie Earls of Seaforth, and in 1719 had the distinction of first being garrisoned by Spanish soldiers and then being blown apart by a Hanoverian warship during the abortive Jacobite rising. The castle was restored in 1932 and now holds Jacobite, Mackenzie and McRae relics.
Our journey took us on to the Isle of Skye. Skye is the largest island of the Inner Hebrides. This island is historically best known for its association with Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles Edward Stuart, and Flora MacDonald. Flora, a Jacobite heroine, helped Prince Charles escape from the Hebrides where he had taken refuge after the Battle of Culloden. Until 1995, the only access to this island was by ferry. From our lunch stop at Caerleakin, we looked back to Kyle of Lochalsh and the new bridge which now connects the island to the mainland. This small bridge, together with the new bridge, is also a necessary part of that link to the island. Our stop at Caerleakin was brief, but we were able to get a few pictures of the village during the lunch break. Caerleakin derived its name from Norway's Haakon, who sailed through there in 1263 on his way to defeat by Alexander III at Largs. The local history of Skye is one of many disputes between the clans of the MacDonald, McKinnon and MacLeods. Overlooking the straits is the ruin of Castle Moyle. It was once known as Dunarkin and built as a defence against the marauding Norsemen.
Back on the mainland we paused briefly to capture a view of Loch Carron. In the mist across the loch we could just make out the village of Plockton, depicted as Loch Dewey in the TV series Hamish Macbeth. From Loch Carron we headed east across the top of the Highlands to Culloden Moor.
Late in the afternoon we arrived at Culloden Moor under very heavy cloud, which added to the bleakness of this desolate and historic battlefield. It was here that Bonnie Prince Charles and the Jacobites were finally defeated on the 16th of April 1746, the last battle to be fought on British soil. The Jacobite cause, under the leadership of Bonnie Prince Charlie, perished under the onslaught of nearly 9,000 Hanoverian troops led by the Duke of Cumberland. The only building left standing at the battlefield was the old heather-thatched Leenock cottage, of which this is a restored version. By now it was late in the afternoon and time to return to the Craiglin Hotel for another night.